The 7th anniversary is soon to be upon us, and masters all over are finally going to have to make a decision as to what banner they're going to be summoning on, as they've probably been pondering over that fact for the last 6 months since the last GSSR for New Year's. Now, if you're one of my newer players and you don't know why the GSSR is such a big deal, basically, for about the price of $15 USD or whatever that is in your local currency, you are able to do a guaranteed 10 roll. Yes, a guaranteed multi that will give you one of the limited 5 stars that is specifically on rate up on that specific GSSR, and you're only able to do it once. And it's a pretty good deal because usually you have to spend, hundreds of dollars to try to guarantee yourself a 5 star that's on rate up, but this one you are guaranteed to get one of a few that are on rate up. Now, some of them are 1 in 3, some of them are like 1 in 6, and a lot of people like to pick ones that give them a very good odds of getting who they want, but sometimes some of the more broken servants that would really boost your account are on those 1 in 6 chances, so it can be a little bit of a stressful decision. Do I go for the higher value one that I might win big and get the meta support, but I also might lose really hard and get someone that's really not useful to me? Or do I go for one of the ones that is more balanced? All 4 of the units are really good, and hey, I don't have any of them, or maybe you have 3 of them and one of the other ones is one you don't have, but getting an NP2 copy of any of the other 3 would still be really good. It's a very stressful decision, especially because you do have to pay for it. But stress not, your boy ZTL is here to go over all 20 of the GSSR banners. We're going to break all of them down. I'm going to give you my thoughts and opinions on all of them, whether they're worth going for, if you do decide to go for one of them, because I do acknowledge that some of the bad banners might have a unit that you really want. And so I'll try to give you some copium on, well, if you're going to go for the Castoria one, then, if you don't get her, these units might be kind of a bit of copium, a bit of a decent consolation prize. So strap in, get comfortable, and if you could, please leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, because this one took a long time to put together. I wanted this one to be out about a month ago, but I had to thoroughly make sure I had tested some of these weirder units that I don't use a whole lot to make sure I could give an accurate take on some of them. If I was going to say you're probably not going to use them very much, or suggest some corner cases where you might use them, so that would be greatly appreciated on this video. But with that being said, strap in, get comfortable, and let's start diving right into this with the first banner. Saber 1 is going to be the first banner, and this is going to be a 1 in 6 chance if you are looking for one of the 5-star servants in particular, so do keep that in mind. It is one of the lower chances, but it's also fairly balanced. You have 3 pretty good servants in Okita, who is a very strong single target quick saber that's really good at looping her NP back. Then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have Masashi, who is a very strong single target buster saber, who, even though she's not as crazy with, I guess, the technical refund, with her first skill that's able to double her hits, that one arts card can pretty much fully refund her entire NP, and it's gonna get buffed in the future to be a 3-turn buff, so she kind of goes absolutely wild when you have this up whenever she gets that buff. She's very strong, especially with a good power mod against moon cancers and alter egos, which you don't run into all that often, but it's very nice whenever you do run into them, because they will be popping up in some future story chapters, so it's nice to have someone like this at your disposal to take them out. Then there's Nero Bride, who herself is not the craziest DPS. I mean, she'll get the job done, but really where she kind of excels is at being a mini version or a plug suitable version of an additional Castoria, because she does give you a rather decent NP gain buff, a 30% battery, a very strong attack buff, and the Sky Power mod, which is one of the rarer power mods, because there's not a whole lot of servants that, you benefit off just having a pure Sky Power mod. It's Earth and Man that are some of the better ones to have, but when you want Sky Power mod, it is so useful when you have someone like Nero Bride, especially because she can just be a very good plug suit in for like an arts team, or again, if you don't have your own Castoria, she can sub in as kind of a baby Castoria and is rather good. Unfortunately, the other 3 5-stars are not the craziest. Arthur, as you guys might have seen in my Buster AoE Saber video, is not the greatest. Despite being one of the stronger and more important servants in the whole context of Fate, he's not all that good in the game. Even with his super massive power mod that he's able to get against giant enemies, he doesn't really do a whole lot against them. Sigurd can be very good against dragons, and you can pull off some pretty decent solos with them. I mean, someone was able to pull off a solo against the boss Kama and Oku, so that's kind of nice, I suppose, but you cannot deny that his kit is really not the best. You know, he's not regarded in the highest regard. Then there's Shiki, who is getting better and better with her buffs, but again, just leaves a little bit to be desired with the one hit on the AoE NP. I mean, she's probably the better of the three worst servants to get if you do end up getting her, but unfortunately, you probably won't use her a whole lot unless you're specifically a fan of Karno Kyokai. So even though it's a 1 in 6 chance to get the specific servant you want, say you're going for Okita or Masashi, really you should look at it as a 50-50 chance, because 3 of the servants are very beneficial and will help you out, and the other 3, you know, you're probably not going to break out all that often. I mean, again, Sigurd can do really good damage against dragons, so you might break him out every now and then, and again, Shiki's kit is decent, so you might use her every now and then, but I would say the real consolation going on to the Saber 1 banner is that Saber Alter is on here. She's a pretty rare servant being story locked, so she doesn't really get raid ups very often, and she will be disgustingly good next year when she gets her buff that allows her to basically refund up to 70% NP when you started to loop that first skill, which is ridiculous considering that she's a buster servant. There's also Siegfried on the 4-star over there with his recent buff, is a pretty decent buster AoE looper, having that dragon power model, though it would be really unfortunate if you got him and Sigurd because they're kind of double dipping into each other's power mods. But aside from that, you have some other decent options. You know, Nero just got buffed recently, but realistically, it's the 50-50 on the 5 stars, and then it's realistically Saber Alter that you want to get as your 4-star. Now, the Saber 2 banner is the overall safer pick, in my opinion, as all of the 5-star servants are relatively good, but obviously the lookouts that you're trying to get are Muramasa, who is an absolutely insane AoE arts saber that is able to put up some pretty decent damage as he's able to stack as he fires his NP continually. He's also able to do some really good crit damage, especially if the enemy ever tries to dodge or get away with him on his second skill. He's just very, very strong in and of himself. Charlemagne is also pretty decent right now. He'll be able to do Black Grail farming with Ruler Scotty when she comes out, but he also gets better once the White Day event comes out in about 2 years from now. He'll be getting really good with a more recent buff. And then finally, there's Ibuki, who is a runner-up, if not the best AoE buster saber in the game, still currently on JP, although crossing my fingers that we don't just randomly get one in the next couple of days, and that invalidates that statement, but she'll still be very good. She's very, very good for farming. She does pretty decent damage. Her power mod is a little bit on the weaker side, but she's also got some nice utility going into challenge quests, being able to pierce invincibility, pierce defense. She's just really strong. Now, the other ones are also pretty good in and of themselves. You know, Benny Enma is rocking some pretty nasty power mods that does let her be fairly viable in most CQs. You might be able to make the argument that her kit is falling off a little bit, but she also does have the unique skills of being able to buff the entire party and debuff the entire enemy party. She's just a relatively safe servant all around. Then you have the Trung sisters, who are arguably weaker than the Dioscuri twins, but they're still a fine single target arts DPS in and of themselves. You probably won't use them very much, but if you do decide to use them, they'll surprise you in being better than you might think. Unfortunately, the Summer Okita Alter, even though she's still a good AoE quick servant, if you do get her, do not be afraid to use her. She will loop and do fine, you know, do all the things that you want her to do. Unfortunately, we are getting Senno Rikyu later on this year for the Guda Guda event, who kind of becomes the default best quick AoE servant for a while, just because she's kind of got that Summer Ibuki thing going where she's an AoE Berserker, so you can kind of just bring her to anything. But that doesn't invalidate and say that Okita Alter is bad or anything. It's just unfortunate in a couple of months we're going to have someone that's really going to be taking that top spot. And Saber Astolfo is not bad. It's just his kit is a little bit weird, I guess I would say. But, you know, if you test him out, you use him occasionally every now and then, he's not got the worst kit. He can surprise you a bit with how well he's able to refund his NP, and he's got some pretty effective skills, I would say, with being able to evade multiple attacks, being able to kind of stun the entire enemy party if you get lucky. So not the best DPS, especially for quick, but he's not the worst servant you could get. You know, it's not like getting Arthur on the other banner, who you're probably never going to use. You'll at least break him out every now and then. Now, the 4-stars that are on this banner are not the craziest, but there are some notable ones. You know, Diermud Saber is a rather good servant. Bargus pretty much cannot die outside of just getting blatantly one-shot by an enemy, so she's very, very good. Tomoe Saber can be a decent arts AoE looper if you don't happen to get Muramasa for the Saber class. And then there's Roland, who kind of just does a lot of really good things, although you would like him to be at higher NP levels to do some decent damage, but his kit is relatively good overall. So aside from Saber 1 being more of the high rolly one with Saber Alter and 3 of the better 5-star sabers, this one does have some really nice power behind it, and it's more safe. But again, you do risk getting more of a mediocre pull. But again, overall, I would say it's a bit safer. Honestly, the Archer 1 banner is one of those ones that you really can't lose on, because all 4 of the 5-star servants are relatively good. And if you want one of them in particular, say that's Gilgamesh, that's a 1 in 4 chance or a 25% chance to get them on your pull. But even if you don't get the one you want in particular, the other guys are really good. Gilgamesh is always going to be good with pretty much an anti-servant power mod. There are very few servants that are not weak to Enema Elish, and being one of the poster children of Fate, he's always going to be relatively good. I mean, they buff him basically every single year. Then you have Moriarty as a single target buster archer who's got a 50% battery, can double buff anybody, because you might be saying, ZTL, doesn't he only buff evil people? But guess what? Moriarty now has a buff where he can make everybody evil, so he can double buff everybody. Plus, he pierces invincibility. The guy is just really, really strong. Ishtar might be falling off a little bit because for whatever reason, as popular as Rin is, they will not buff this servant, but even then, she's still not bad. A 50% battery, really solid free damage on anybody with the 3rd skill, and the ability to bomb stars with her own innate crit damage buff and technically pierce invincibility and her own invincibility buff. You can't really go wrong with Ishtar. I mean, she's not the craziest servant ever by today's standards, but she's not bad. You can't say she's terrible. And then Archer Artoria, sure, her damage isn't the craziest, but there's not many servants that can loop the way she's able to do. I mean, she's a year 1 servant that's looping like Melusine from year 6. I mean, she's a little nutty. And even the 4 stars aren't half bad. Emiya himself is a very solid servant. He has like, what, 7 rank ups and interludes, so he's kind of a Saint Quartz bank if you do pull him. Then you have Atalanta, who again doesn't have the craziest kit, but if you need a quick looper, she can get the job done. You have Bridgebreaker over there, who's a still relatively rare servant, so you can pull them for more of a collector's item. And again, even then, they're not that bad. Chiron is a very good support slash DPS with a very strong ability to remove enemy defensive buffs before he does damage with an earth power mod. That dude is pretty solid. And even though Tomoe has a very basic kit, 1, she's really cute, and 2, she can do some pretty good damage. So Archer 1 is just a relatively safe banner overall. This also extends to the Archer 2 banner, but this one has Super Orion on it, and it's a 1 in 3 chance or a 33% chance to get him if you do go for this one. Personally, this is the one that I'm going to be looking at because Super Orion is still a top tier solo wing servant, not because he's super defensive or tanky, but for the opposite reason. He is an offensive menace. You get 1 or 2 stacks of that NP going, and you're going to be critting for hundreds of thousands of damage and just pulverizing every enemy into the ground. He's still very good to this day, and if you don't get him, well, the other 2 are not the craziest archers ever. Jean Archer can still loop relatively well, but at NP1 her damage is lacking just a little bit, but she's still usable and will be helped out a lot by the fact that you can pick up Black Grail for free during the anniversary. Doesn't fix all of her problems, but it definitely makes her a lot more usable. And Sei over there, even though she has a rough time looping, does have a battery buff that makes things a little bit easier and does help her kind of get across the finish line. And with Oberon now being in the game, being able to plug suit in a 70% battery that also gasses up her damage, she definitely loves having that around with her triple power mods. And having power mod against Shadow Servants does still kind of make her the queen of free quest farming. And again, like the other banner, the 4 stars are not bad. Ashfataman is very, very solid. Zenobia, even though she doesn't have the highest damage, can still be an effective looper. Even if you have to use face cards, she's stacking up crit damage, so she can kind of just wash the enemies with those, especially in challenge quests. She's very, very nice. Sith over there is a bit of an interesting unit. You can kind of get away with using her as a single target farmer, but you do want higher NP copies and higher investment at NP1 because she doesn't do a whole lot of damage. But if you do start investing in her, she can be a very powerful asset for your Chaldea. And then even someone like Calamity Jane can find uses with her 3rd skill. You know, Summer Anastasia is not all that bad. You could get some pretty decent looping with Summer Chloe. Really, the only dud 4-star is Osaka Behime over there, which is a little bit fitting for, well, someone who's living the neat life. Lancer 1, I would say, is a bit of a gamble, but it's not a bad gamble. It's realistically a 50-50 because Ereshkigal and Skahawk are very, very good servants servants that recently got even better buffs over on the JP side of things, so it's not like they're going to be left in the mud like some of the older units. They still get buffed and are still very, very strong over there. But then the other two, Lancer and Brynhildr, are not bad, but they're not the craziest. I mean, Lancer you could still get some pretty decent usage out of because they fixed her third skill, and anti-mail is still a pretty decent power mod, and Brynhildr has her own power mod, the Brynhildr's Beloved power mod, that if you can find certain heroic spirits that have that power mod, she can put some decent work into them, and her skills are not bad after they buff them, but realistically, the prize is Ereshkigal and Skahawk. But even though I say it's a 50% chance to get one of the better servants, even if you whiff the 50-50 and get Lancer or Brynhildr, they're not bad consolation prizes. Realistically, what I think is kind of the dud for this banner is the 4-star options are not all that great. Sure, Lancer Altar is a very hot servant to have on your Chaldea, but she's still waiting on another buff to kind of make her a little bit more viable. She is one of those servants that kind of got, you know, left holding the bag with only a 20% battery instead of the standard 30 to 50% that you'd realistically like your Buster AoEs to have, but I'm sure they'll buff her sometime soon. Thankfully, Parvati and Finn are on this banner. They're not bad loopers for quick and arts respectively, but everyone else is not super crazy. I mean, the Valkyries are okay, but it's not like some of the other banners that have these crazy limited 4 stars. This one is kind of okay, but the 5 stars, you're going there for the 50-50 shot at one of the better Lancers in the game, and even if you whiff, you still get a pretty decent single target Buster Lancer in either Lancer or Brynhildr. Lancer 2 is the first banner that I'm going to smack the gold star priority list. You should be gluing your eyeballs to this one. It should be getting your attention because it is a 1 in 3 shot, a 33% chance to get Melusine. Melusine is still, and I will say this with confidence, the best Lancer in the game. Not only is she a pretty good single target art servant, but she can convert with her third skill into the best Buster AoE Lancer we have right now, who can use Black Grail, which is not a common thing for Buster servants. So being able to be one of the better single target Lancers and the best Buster AoE Lancer tells me that she's probably the best. I mean, she's literally 2 units in one, and the consolation prizes aren't half bad. Romulus is a kind of weird servant. You can use him as a Buster AoE guy, but realistically, he's half support, half actual damage dealer. He focuses around making all of your allies Roman, making the enemies Roman, doing more damage to Romans. It's all Roma with this guy. I mean, it's Romulus Quinrinus. I mean, what do you want from the founder of Rome? Then you have Rioma Lancer over there, who I have not had the nicest things to say about in the past, but as a consolation prize, he's not bad. I mean, he's got a 50% arts buff. He's got a 50% battery. When he fires his NP, he gets 50% defense. I mean, he's not a half bad servant, especially if you're starting out the game, but realistically, it is Melusine. It is the 1 in 3 shot at getting one of the best servants in the game. Unfortunately, the Lancer 4 stars are not super great on Lancer 2 because the only ones that I would really be keeping my eyes looking out for is Melt and Percival. They're both AoE arts Lancers that are pretty good at looping. Percival slants a little bit more into being better into CQs with stuff like taunting and having the Pierce invincibility and stuff, but realistically, this one should have your eyes looking at it because Melusine is on this banner and she's really good. Now, this isn't the only banner to be considering. Again, there's other ones that have the gold star standard, but keep this one in mind because she's very, very good. Rider 1, unfortunately, while it is a good banner in its own right, having both Maid Altar and Ivan on the banner, that's not bad. You know, Maid Altar is very good with the upcoming Ruler Scotty or even the original Caster Scotty as just a high damaging single target quick rider, and Ivan is one of those servants that continues to get buffs and just has really strong skills. The guy's got the battery, the NP gain, he can remove everybody's buffs, he can cleanse his own buffs, has double power mods. The guy's kinda nutty. It's just unfortunate that one, Iskandar's on the banner. Now, if you're a newer player and you just came back from Fate Zero, you might be saying, what do you mean? ZTL, Iskandar's the GOAT. Unfortunately, they've let him just hang and dry in FGO. He is one of the worst servants in the game, just because if they would give him a 30% battery even, and maybe make his Buster skill 3 times for 3 turns, he would go from being one of the worst servants in the game to one of the best. But unfortunately, in the meta that we're in, you gotta have a battery. Like, if you don't have a battery, it definitely hinders you a lot. Not that I'm saying that you can't try to use him if you really do like him, but you're going to find out really quickly that he's lacking a lot of the modern skills that more modern, nodes and quests are going to be demanding that you have. And unfortunately, the 4 stars on Rider 1 are not the craziest either. I mean, even getting somebody like Rider Mordred, who I praise a lot for her looping ability, is not going to be the best AoE looper for you at NP1. Now, if you do already happen to have her at like NP2 or 3 and this is your 4th copy, then she's going to be a lot better for it. She's one of those servants that gets better with investment. But unfortunately, Rider 1 is one of those ones that I would put lower on your priority list unless you absolutely love Salter. And I know that is going to be why anybody goes on Rider 1 is because of Salter. Do not lie to me. You know it's not the best banner to go on, but you're going on it for Salter. And for one, I can't blame you because who doesn't love Salter? Rider 2, I would also say is lower on the priority list, but we just got a monstrous buff for Constantine on the JP side of things. Not that that makes Rider 2 a must summon, but it makes this banner a lot better now in retrospect. Basically, his NP got a bunch of crazy buffs. It gives, the whole party big defense, invincibility, buster buffs, just all these buffs out the wazoo. It becomes a very, very good support skill, just offensively and defensively, and pairs fairly nicely with some of his skills. He's not the craziest servant by any stretch of the imagination, but he's gotten a lot better, and that helps because Reigns is also on this banner, and that's functionally Waver 2 that has a very strong NP that makes your units take type neutral against people that would be effective against them. This is very good with Berserkers because it makes your Berserkers take neutral while being able to slam the enemies for super effective damage. Think of like the Morgan boss fight in Lost Belt 6. She basically does that for all your Zerks with her NP, and plus all of her other skills are really good. Da Vinci Rider is one of the better loopers in the game. I mean, she gives NP on her NP every single turn, and then NP just on a skill as well. There's just NP flowing out of every orifice into your team. I mean, you just can't not have NP when she's on the team. I mean, her damage can be a little bit low, but you could fix that with Black Grail and Oberon, so that's really not a problem. And Bakken is not a bad unit either. I already did a review on her, so if you want more details on that, go back like a week or 2 on the channel. There should be a review for Bakken. She's not half bad. But I say it's a little bit more lower priority because there are some better banners you can go on, but think of this like, say, Lancer 1 or Archer 1, Saber 2. It's one of those banners where it's just a good one to go on. If you go summon on it, you're gonna get a good servant. Unfortunately, the 4 stars are not the craziest. I mean, Dobra is okay now on the JP side of things. Again, not the best Buster AoE looper. She does require you to have K-Scope, but hey, if you're fighting Dragon, she'll be really good against that. And plus, it's Blue Eyes White Dragon. Who doesn't like Blue Eyes White Dragon? Or I guess Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, technically. Who doesn't like that in FGO? So again, not a bad banner if, you're really liking Reigns because you watch Lord Elmaloy Case Files, and you don't get her, but you end up getting Da Vinci Rider and, I don't know, maybe Rider Canis. It's not a bad banner to summon on, but not the highest value. Now, Caster 1, I think I'm going to say something a little bit controversial, but I don't think this is one of those gold star priorities, specifically because even though Caster Scotty and Merlin over here are still some of the best supports in the game, you can get away with not doing the Caster 1 GSSR and doing a different one, and then trying to pull on the summer banners for Lady Avalon and Ruler Scotty, because if you want to do quick looping, Ruler Scotty is going to be better for you anyway. And even though I've done numerous videos talking about why Merlin and Proto Merlin are not the exact same, they function differently on different teams, you can still get away with using Proto Merlin or Lady Avalon, whatever you want to call her, in your sustain or stall team. She'll still get the job done in a different way. It's not a bad banner to go on, but you can get away with going on, say, Caster 2 or going on the Melusine banner and then trying your luck, especially since we're going to be getting a ton of Saint Quartz for the anniversary with the leveling up servants buff that we get. We get 3 Saint Quartz per leveled up servant. That's going to give you a lot to spend on the summer banners, which is why I think you can get away with not summoning on this banner. However, if you do, the consolation prizes for not getting Scotty or Merlin are very, very strong. Ilya is a hard-hitting, single-target buster caster with a fat 50% battery. She is definitely not bad to have at all. The AoE version of her is Caster Nero over there. Even though she doesn't do a whole lot of damage, she's still fine if you don't have a better buster AoE caster, or really just an AoE caster in general. And then Da Vinci is getting really, really good buffs. In fact, when Lilim Harlem drops around, you know, April or May next year, she'll be getting another buff, and she just keeps getting better and better as time goes on. I mean, 50% battery, team support, pierce invincibility, survivability. She's actually not half bad of a servant. And then the 4 stars are also really solid. Caskill might not be super great right now, but he's gonna get a buff that makes him really nutty in the future. You have Nitocris, who is very, very valuable to not only new accounts, but also veteran accounts, with being able to cheese through some higher difficulty nodes with the insta-kill mechanic. You know, is there a large 400,000 HP enemy on one of the 90 plus nodes? Well, you might be able to get away with it if their death rate is low enough. You know, Nitocris just kind of comes in clutch like that. And then you also have people like Helena and Edison especially, that are these 4-star kind of omni supports that are waiting on maybe one more buff to really get good. So even if you get one of them, Helena is kind of already good to go as a generic support. I would like to see her maybe get one more buff. You know, I think she can get away with one of those, but Edison especially, I think, is butting on one solid buff, and that dude is going to be disgustingly good for, you know, weaker boxes and stuff along that. So I don't think you have to summon on this one, but it does have a lot of very good servants to offer you. However, the Caster 2 banner isn't even a gold star, hey, this is a priority one to be looking out for. This is a red alert Omega level threat, because it has still to this day the best servant in the game. I mean, ask any player who they think the best servant in the game is. Ask anybody that uploads FGO content who they think the best servant in the game is, and almost unanimously you will hear, and I've tried this because I pulled around and I asked a bunch of people, you will hear them say that Castoria is by far the best unit in the game. And still, a unit that released for the 5th year anniversary, even year 9, now we don't have the JP FGO, you know, 9th year anniversary unit yet, but still is the uncontested best unit in the game. Again, we don't know who the 9th anniversary unit is going to be right now, but I doubt they're going to power creep Castoria, and I hope I do not eat those words, because if a unit is better than Castoria, this game is in trouble, because power creeping this unit is ridiculous. Not only does she just take arts to the umpteenth degree in terms of power level, but she works with other card types. You can use her in buster setups to give yourself more survivability, extra power mods, bonus just 50% battery, NP gain for the whole party. I mean, she's just disgusting. And I mean, solemn defense is still such a good survivability method that other servants are stealing it from her. Kukulkan, Aoko, they are stealing her buff because solemn defense is so good. The only reason I would say don't summon on Caster 2 is if you already have the other 3 5-stars, because then at that point you have a 25% chance to get Castoria and a 75% chance to get a servant you already have. And even though they're good, I mean, I don't really know what you're going to do with an NP2 Miss Crane. And sure, Izumo and Murasaki are really good, but you know, are they NP2 bring them everywhere good? I don't really think so. But it does mean the other 3 servants are good consolation prizes. If you don't have anybody on here, and especially you don't have Castoria, even if you whiff out on getting her, Izumo is a very strong, you know, 50% battery, single target, quick caster that can do some pretty good damage. Miss Crane, you'll hear, is a big brain unit, but once you've used her once and figured out how her NP works, you'll have it down pat every single time, and she's really nice in team comps that can afford her team cost, because again, you're using a lot of 5-stars, 5-star CEs, sometimes you just can't fit her in there. And then Murasaki is just solid. You know, she's anti-demonic, gives that to the entire party, she can loop, not a bad servant at all. And thankfully, all 3 of the 4-star servants are also rather solid. You have Caster Corday, who is a fun servant to use in Challenge Quest. She's not the craziest, most broken servant, but she is rather fun, and fun does convert into being a fairly decent servant. You know, she pretty much skill seals enemies and then gets a power mod on them. So if you want to use her with, say, Summer Anastasia, who also applies skill seal, that's a really funny team that you can make. The Mice Daikakutin over there is a very, very strong, quick AoE looper that also doubles as being a very strong party support. And then Miyu is one of those servants that is getting better with every buff that she receives. So this is the red alert Omega level threat. Go after Castoria if you do not have her. She is disgustingly broken, but even if you don't get her, the consolation prizes are still fairly good. Alright, technically Assassin 1 is one of those 50% banners where you have 2 really good 5-star units and the other 2 are decent. They're not bad. You know, if Cleopatra gets her Imperial Privilege off, you know, which is like a 60% chance, if she gets that, she is a really, really good servant, but if she whiffs the buff, she's not super great. If she ever gets a buff in the future that guarantees that, she'll be pretty disgusting. Shuten, on the other hand, pretty much gives you every debuff in the game on the entire enemy party, and she does really solid damage. It's just with a one-hit NP, it's really hard to get her to loop, which is kind of what you want to be able to do if you're going to be a meta servant. But hey, if you want to bring her to challenge quests and stuff, you can still get some pretty decent mileage out of her. But MHX, after buffing all of her skills and her NP, is finally a really good anti-Saber assassin. Trust me, it's better than it actually sounds, but realistically, you're probably just going to use an archer that has a power mod on the person you would be using MHX on anyway, but she's still not bad. And King Hassan over there is a very, very strong unit. He keeps getting good buffs and is one of the better assassins in the game. No longer does Kama stand uncontested as the best assassin in the game. Finally, King Hassan has stood up out of his old man rocking chair and he's ready to kind of put in some work. So he's pretty decent if you get him, but let's be honest, nobody's really prioritizing the assassin one banner. But hey, if you are and you really like King Hassan or you really like MHX, they're not half bad. I would just say there's higher priority GSSRs to go on, especially since you're paying the $15. Come on, use your money for something better. Especially because Assassin 2 is arguably the best GSSR banner to be going on. Not because Koyanskaya of Light is better than Castoria, it's because Koyanskaya of Light is essential to doing buster farming, whereas with arts farming, while Castoria definitely allows you to do very disgusting things, you can still get away with arts looping if that's the only thing you want to do with, say, a combination of a Waver, a Proto Merlin, a Nero Bride. You can get away with it, especially even with lower rarity options. You have Asclepius, Paracelsus, Jufu. You just have a lot of really low rarity options that can make up for a Castoria. It might hurt your ability to, say, do Black Grail farming or Oberon farming, but you can still get by if all you want to do is arts loop. But with buster looping, you have to have Koyanskaya because of how her batteries work. Not only is she giving you a 50% battery and really good power mods, by the way, but she's also reducing the skill cooldown of your skills by 2, which not only lets you loop back your skills so you can do more damage by, say, proccing a buster buff again and doubling up on that, but you get to reuse your batteries as well. And so you're able to brute force through pretty much any node in the game, and it's arguably the most painless way to get through 90++ farming, and you have a 1 in 3 shot or a 33% chance of getting her, as opposed to Castoria being a 1 in 4 or a 25% chance. And the consolation prizes aren't bad. Kama, I already did a video on her a couple of days ago talking about how she stood the test of time. She's a year 3 servant that, like I just said with King Hassan, is still competing for the best assassin in the game. She's ridiculously good without ever being buffed. And Semiramis, I know she's not the craziest servant, but believe you me, if they gave her one decent buff, not a banger buff, not an insane one, but one decent buff, she would be one of the better assassins in the game as well. Her kit is not that far off from being ridiculous. And then some of the 4-star options are pretty good on here, specifically Okita Assassin. She is going to get a monstrous buff that allows her to do Black Grail farming. So even if you do whiff out on Koyanskaya over here and you're not able to do buster farming, you at least might still secure Okita, who is going to be really good with the Ruler Scotty who's coming out in a couple of weeks. So it's just a very, very solid banner and is probably your best chance at getting into the meta. I still think Castoria is a stronger unit, but it's hard to argue with a 1 in 3 chance that also has one of the better assassins in the game and also has one of the better quick loopers in the game as well. Berserker 1 is another one of those banners that just has really solid units on it. I mean, Kentucky Berserker over here is just really good at chunking large enemies in 90+ and 90++ nodes with the 50% battery and still some of the highest NP damage in the game. MHX Alter, again, is one of the best quick DPSs in the game with 2 rather good power mods. She pretty much locks down Saber class with her power mod against them, but also recently got an NP upgrade that gave her a power mod against good aligned enemies. So overall, she's just a relatively strong quick DPS and just a good DPS in general. You'll just have to babysit her a little bit because unfortunately there's no survivability on her. Hijikata is, well, Hijikata, he has a gimmick that, you know, the lower his HP gets, the more damage he'll do. You can kind of invest that and you can play around with his guts to try to get insane maximum damage, but realistically he's the dud on this banner. And even though Raiko might not seem really crazy see right now, she will be getting a buff in about a year's time that gives her a 30% battery and fixes the buster buff on her second skill to being, I believe it's 3 times for 3 turns, which allows her to be really, really good when it comes to buster looping, especially because she has some really good power mods on her third skill. And hey, as a crit servant, she's not half bad either. Although the 4 stars aren't the craziest, you could still secure a Heracles, which is not super bad. If you have his Bond CE, he's one of the better soloers in the game, and Lancelot is not a bad quick AoE looper if you can get him at higher NP compies, but if you get him at NP1, please, for the love of all things, do not try to make this guy loop at NP1. He does literally hit like a wet paper towel. Also, to note, if you do pull Frankenstein, don't give up on her. If they fix the stun on her NP, she'll actually be a rather solid servant. She does really good damage, and her ability to refund her NP is not bad. It's just the 2-turn stun is really way too much for any servant in the modern meta. I don't know what they were thinking with this and why they have not fixed it, but do keep your eyes peeled on this one. If for whatever reason you avoid Koyanskaya, Castoria, and some of the other good servants we're going to talk about, and you do pull Frankenstein on this one, do keep her in mind. Do not forget about her. She'll be really good once they fix that. Berserker 2 is one of those gold star banners that you should be looking out for, because if you have all of the meta supports, or say you already have Koyanskaya, this is a really good one to look at, because Arjuna Alter is a really good buster AoE looper, also not bad into challenge quests because he just does a metric butt ton of damage. Basically, he gets power mod on anybody that's debuffed, and he debuffs people on his NP with a buster down, so he does more damage and then gets a power mod because he's doing more damage to just do even more damage. The guy is really, really ridiculous. Summer Masashi you might think is falling out of the meta right now because she doesn't have a battery, but she recently got a buff over on the JP version of the game. They gave her a power mod against Saber, so she kind of puts a lot of the AoE archers out of a job because she's a Berserker, she's already super effective, and then stole their power mod, so she's going to be really disgusting, and she's still very good into challenge quests. You know, being able to loop very effectively, piercing invincibility, having 2 methods of survivability. She's not bad if you get her. And then Morgan, you guys know, is one of my favorite servants of all time. She's the #1 wifey of the channel, the mascot of the ZTL channel. There's not a whole lot I can say that's bad about her except her NP1 damage against people that are not on her power mod. But aside from that, I mean, she can do the immortal team comp, she can farm, you put her against men, you put her against fairies, you put her against Knights of the Round Table, she's thrashing all of them. She can do some nice crit damage. I mean, just look up ZTL Morgan and I'm sure you'll find a billion videos of me continually praising this servant, although I have also criticized her every now and then, but don't tell her about that because she'll hit me with wrong dominiad. If you look at some of the 4 stars that we have on this banner, the main one you want to be looking out for is Kriemhild. The other 3 are kind of duds, I would say, but Kriemhild is not bad. Being able to remove enemy defensive buffs on her NP, having the chaotic and dragon power mod is very, very strong, plus a taunt to slap on your support so she doesn't get nuked because she's a Berserker. If she takes any damage, she'll melt, and then also having a 50% battery. Yeah, she's pretty good. At NP1, her damage might be a little low, but in my experience, having her now at NP2 over on the JP side of things compared to my NP1 version of Kriemhild on the NA side of things, that NP2 really does make a difference. So if you're going on this to try to get an extra copy of Kriemhild and one of the 3 main Berserkers, this is just a good banner in general because you'll walk away with some good servants. Let's be honest, you're going on the extra 1 banner because you want to have a chance of getting Jalter, who still has the highest attack stat in the game, and even though she's lacking her 50% battery that she recently got on the JP side of things, can still unleash ungodly damage onto opponents and is really good into boss fights with her survivability and being able to bomb a bunch of stars to crit them to death, and then also denying the bosses their buffs on that same NP. And when she does finally get that 50% battery buff, when Ordeal Call 2 does drop on the NA side of things, she'll also be really good into farming setups, so it's really funny. You can use her to obliterate bosses, and because she just has really good free damage, you can just use her in 90 plus or 90 plus farming setups. She's pretty good. Speaking of farming, there's Dante's, who is still one of the premier quick AoE loopers in the game. He just has a fat amount of NP gain, has multiple hits on his NP to get that overkill, does pretty good damage. I mean, all Avengers are going to hit pretty hard, and now he has a 50% battery, which allows him to loop just even better than he was doing before. You'll hear some people say that, oh, you want to secure NP2 or NP3, but now that we're starting to get quick servants being able to do Black Grail farming, that is less and less needed nowadays. That was more of a, year 3 quick meta thing. You still would like to have higher NP copies to secure, bigger nodes and everything, and so they can kind of clear everything for you, but it's not necessarily as needed, especially because Oberon's in the game as well. You can just really juice up the amount of damage your servants are able to do. So even if it's an NP1 Dante's, you'll be fine. The other two, unfortunately, are, I'm not going to say duds, but you probably won't use them very often. Holmes is one of those MLG FGO characters that you use if you're trying to like min turn something, or you're trying to like destroy a boss as fast as possible. I describe him as the best servant you'll never use, because Holmes is not bad. It's just you're probably going to double up on Castorias, or you're going to double up on Koyanskaya, Scotty's, just better support. He just doesn't really fit into too many team comps. And unfortunately, Amakusa, even though if you look at him on paper, all of his skills and his NPs read really broken, unfortunately, at the end of the day, he still doesn't do a whole lot of damage. I think he's still lacking maybe like a good or evil power mod, something depending on how they want to play with that lore-wise. But as soon as he gets something along those lines, or even some amount of ramping damage, maybe he can build up throughout a fight, once he gets that, he'll be really, really good. But right now, his kit is very strong. It's just he still doesn't do very much damage, which ultimately, at the end of the day, whether you're farming or you're fighting bosses, you gotta be doing damage. You gotta close out the fight in some way. So he is good if you do get him. But unfortunately, I do think he could still be a little bit better. But not a bad consolation prize. Because he has so many buffs, you can get a decent bit of Saint Quartz out of him from doing his rank ups and his interludes. Now, as far as the 4 stars are concerned, Martha's not bad if you don't have a DPS ruler. Her kit is a bit basic, but with good power mods, decent battery, if you need somebody to beat up a Moon Cancer, you don't have someone like, say, Masashi laying around, she'll get the job done. I mean, there's a reason there's the ruler Martha beating up BB memes. Those are still made today for a good reason. Then you have Gorgon, who isn't the craziest Avenger, DPS unit in the game, but if you don't have another Avenger, or you're just a snake enjoyer, she can get the job done for you. Again, not the craziest, but she's still good enough if you need an Avenger. Same thing for Lobo. I think Lobo is a rather fine single target quick Avenger, better than most people probably give him credit for, but again, you could probably be doing better with, say, someone like Jalter, who's the 5-star on this banner. So if you get Lobo and not Jalter, or Jalter and Lobo, you're probably not going to use him all that much, but he's not all that bad. Unfortunately, the real dud here is Passion Lip. Even though she's absolutely adorable, they have not really been giving her very good buffs as of late, but who knows, maybe for the anniversary over on the JP side of things, they'll toss her a good buff and make her as good as King Protea and Melt over there. But as of right now, she's one of the only BB faces, or Sakura faces, whatever you want to technically call her, that is not super great in the game right now. Now, I'm going to combine extra 2 and 3 together, because both of these banners are what I would like to call just the generic good stuff. If you go into that banner, you're probably going to get a very decent servant, and they have the same 4 stars on their banner. Just to kind of cover the 4 stars first, Estrella, MHXX, and Hephaestion are all very, very strong. Hephaestion has a massive battery, is a pretender, so she's good against all the knight classes. Very, very versatile servant. MHXX hits like an absolute truck. She just dumpsters on pretty much everybody, especially if they're a threat against humanity, or for some reason still if they're a Saber. She got a different job, but is still dunking on Sabers for some reason. And then Estrella is one of the best single target arts units in the game. She can crit like an absolute maniac and provide stars for herself. You'd think she's a quick servant, but no, she's an art servant. Might as well be a new hybrid servant of arts and quick, with how many stars she's generating and how much NP she's refunding. Now, as far as the 5 stars are concerned, on the extra 2 banner, you have some decent ones. I mean, Qixi Huang is still one of the best solo units in the game. I mean, there are some still really hard fights that players are struggling with. When we had the Memorial Quest come back for Lost Belt 3, I thought, well, Qixi Huang is the Lost Belt King. Can he beat, say, the Lanling and Zhang Yu fight? It only took me 2 tries as someone that's not particularly great at soloing, because it's just not something I do all the time, because I don't really enjoy it, but it felt really smooth and easy to get done. He still holds up to this day. Probably could use a buff if we wanted to make him a little bit better, but realistically, he's still pretty fine. Space Ishtar is still one of the most valuable units in the game. Not one of the best. She is falling off a little bit, but because she can be any card type on her second skill, she will never lose value, because even if she's not the best Buster AoE or the best Arts AoE servant in the game, she'll still be one of the better ones, right? And that's the value. No matter where the meta goes, Space Ishtar will always be good. Summer BB is insanely good, because if you do care about resetting your cards, or maybe going into into a fight a couple of times to kind of reset what your starting RNG is, BB on her third skill can lock that down, or even throughout the course of a fight, if you find a really good hand of cards, she can lock that down and essentially trivialize any fight you're going into by cutting out the RNG of whatever your cards are going to be for the next 3 turns. She is really, really funny if you want to use her that way. The Ruler Artoria tries to be that, but unfortunately card shuffling is just not quite the same as locking down your deck for the next 3 turns, but you can use her as a Buster AoE farmer. She's not the craziest, but she is able to get it done if you don't have anybody better. Plus, her crits are pretty nice if you want to bring her into some challenge quests, and she's relatively fun to use. Again, even if card shuffling isn't as good as card locking, it still makes the CQs a little bit fun to do. And again, she can crit really hard, she can farm for you, you know. If that doesn't do it for you, I don't know what will. And then finally, there's Mao Nobu, who's got some pretty good anti-divinity, anti-sky stuff going for her. I didn't talk about her last because she's the worst. It's just, again, Extra 2 is just filled with pretty decent servants. Realistically, the dud is Ruler Artoria over there, so I felt like I had to give her a little bit of pep if you end up pulling for her. But let's be honest, you're probably not pulling on Extra 2. You might pull on Extra 3 over here, but again, the servants are just kind of good. This one more so than the last one. Extra 3 just has guys that are really solid. Karen is very good as a quick looper, but even better if you want to use her into challenge quests because her kit just packs a wallop on the boss. I mean, there's not enough time for me to talk about everything that she does. You can go look on my channel. I have reviews for her. She's basically got a small biography of skills. Ruler Moriarty recently came out. Not a bad servant. You can use him for farming, but again, one of those servants that you would rather use into challenge quests because of his effects. Again, a couple of weeks ago, I dropped a video on him. Himiko is one of those servants you'll see people use in the Immortal setups where, you know, you use her with, say, a Castoria and a Merlin because she overclocks their NP on her own NP, getting more solemn defense from Castoria, more stars and healing and stuff from Merlin as well. Well, mainly just the stars because that's his overcharge. But again, Merlin does give her the healing and the NP and all that stuff, which is really good because she's a ruler, means she's very naturally tanky. And her crits hit really, really hard on some of her skills. She's just a very solid servant overall. Avenger Kama is one of the better arts AoE loopers in the game, but again, we're going to be getting Summer Ibuki in a couple of weeks, and she's probably going to outclass Summer Kama, but again, that doesn't mean Summer Kama's out of a job. Tyra is just a quick version of Jolter, except she really, 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 really hates the Genji. I mean, she really despises them. If you want to know how much, go read High End Kill, but she is astonishingly good. She has a mechanic where she's able to proc damage buffs whenever her guts are procced, and her Bond CE lets you stack more guts on top of that. So she is really good into like soloing or just into hard boss fights. And then I just talked about the summer version of Kiara in yesterday's video, talking about the raid ups that are coming on. Go check out that video if you want more information on her. In that same vein, I'm going to wrap up Extra 4 and 5 into the same kind of section over here in the video because again, they're both really solid. Extra 4 not as good as some of the other ones, with Okita Alter being a solid servant, but again, there are better people to be using. But with the consistent buffs that she's been getting, if you do manage to pull her, she will be a pretty good asset for your Chaldea. Same thing for Kiara. I ranted and raved a couple of days ago about how good Kiara still is to this day. So if you do pull her, she's astonishingly good. You can use her for farming, but especially you can use her to absolutely decimate the bosses in this game. Same thing for Melt Lilith over there. I mean, Melt Lilith is one of the better single target quick units in the game. She stacks as one of the buffs that they gave her, so she just crits like a maniac, removes the enemy's buffs, has good survivability, neuters their NP damage. I mean, just good stuff all around. The only unfortunate thing is the two foreigners on this banner, Abigail and Hokusai over there, are not the craziest. Abigail still is kind of suffering from, you know, early game design. You know, her NP gain is not super great. I mean, she's fine if you don't have anybody else, but you will very quickly replace this servant. Hokusai is not bad by any stretch of the imagination. You can't have manpower mod and be all that bad, but a lot of people will try to use her as a looper, and at NP1 she can really struggle at doing said looping. Then Extra 5 also has the same problem. You have some really good servants on here like King Protea, who is kind of like Bargus, who we talked about all the way at the beginning of this video, who basically cannot die unless she just gets straight up one shot. Basically, she's gonna stack NP damage resistance and max HP buffs for like 10 turns, just getting bigger and bigger and bigger as the fight goes on. Realistically, the only way for her to die is if the enemy runs up to her and crits her like 5 billion times or something. But outside of that, I mean, she's straight up face tanking NPs with how much damage resistance she gets against them and just how much HP she'll have once she starts stacking. And then you also have Van Gogh, who, forget about all three of her skills. Her skills are good. She basically plays in Demi. I don't know if you've ever played, you know, the Yu-Gi-Oh TCG. She's stacking curse stacks all over the place, and you're manipulating, you know, how many she's got, how many you're putting on allies, enemies, all that good stuff. But you can ignore all of that because her NP is dummy nutty broken. You could just disregard her entire kit and just use her for the NP, and that would be worth it alone. Her NP is disgusting. You know, if you're a foreigner, you're an existence outside the domain character, you're getting 200% crit damage, and everybody else 100% crit damage. It's absolutely bonkers. I don't know who just said, yeah, ship this character out there as just someone you can throw on basically any team. She might technically be a quick support, but what? She lowers the enemy's quick resistance and maybe gives somebody a quick buff, but outside of that, she's really generic. You can just toss her into a team and she will wreck house on people, all right? She's very, very strong. Same thing for Voyager. He's getting a buff this anniversary that makes him one of the better quick AoE servants to use in the game as a looper if you don't have somebody like, say, Dante's. And then there's Yang, who is still one of the best single target arts units in the game. She has a power mod on burned enemies, and can you believe what Yang does? She burns enemies. Oh boy, does she burn enemies. She burns when she attacks, she burns when she's attacked, she has a taunt, so they're forced to take on the burns. She's pretty dang good, but I would say Extra 5 is not worth it because Summer Abigail is on there, and just because there is a 20% chance you could get Summer Abigail, who's an absolute bum, I don't care about the pancake memes, you are never going to use this servant. There's probably one guy, little Timmy, in the comments right now who's going to say, oh, I always use, you know, Summer Abigail, I call Cap. Nobody uses this servant. Same thing for Extra 4, you know, nobody's going to use the Abigail that they get. I don't care about the pancake memes, all right? If you want to use your Abigail, that's fine, but they're not very good, and just because you could pull them on one of these two, I would say go to a different banner, especially when the next banner is the best out of all of the extra ones. It's why I'm giving it its own section. Okay, forget about the fact that Oberon is on this one, Oberon being pretty much the crux of the arts and Buster meta. You know, those are really good metas on their own, but then you throw Black Grail into the arts meta or just Oberon in general into the Buster meta, and things get really disgusting really quickly. Sure, Koyan Dark is gonna get power crept by Kukulkan in, what, 6 months from now, but she's still a good servant in her own right. It just because Kukulkan comes out and is like disgusting and is like one of the best Buster servants of all time does not mean that Koyan Dark is bad. You know, you can still use her. She's still an effective servant. Then you have Jacques de Molay, one of the best AoE quick units in the game. Does it matter that the tea lady's coming out for Gouda Gouda? Kind of, but again, that doesn't mean that Jacques de Molay doesn't still have a spot in the meta. She's kind of like Yang, but an AoE farming unit where she has power mod against cursed enemies. And can you believe what she does? She curses enemies, so she sets up her own power mod. Then you have Bazette, who isn't even a normal FGO servant. Instead of doing single target or AoE damage, she does counter damage. So you set up her NP, everybody has to attack her, and then when they hit her, she smacks them with an NP level attack. She is a really fair and balanced servant, I assure you. This person is not broken at all whatsoever. And then there's Doman. What do you want me to say about Doman? Put him on an evil team with all the evil schemers and watch them rip the enemy team apart with the biggest crits and the biggest attack buffs and the most debuffs you've ever seen on his first skill. It's just ridiculous. It's redonkulous how good they are. And unlike the other banners that have the Abigails on them that are not super great, at least on these banners, it's Bunyan. Super Bunyan might not be super great, but the worst she is mid. Summer Abigail is terrible. She is not good at all whatsoever. If you're gonna go on any of the extra class ones, go on Extra 6. This is the gold star for the extra class banners. Please use your Saintquartz on this one if you need extra class servants. If you already have all the main, you know, support guys or whatever, this is a good one to try to snag Oberon, who is insanely good. And if you whiff on him, you at least have 4 really good broken servants plus 1 kind of mid servant, but at least the 4 stars are again Estrella, MHXX, and Hephaestion. And there you have it. We've done every single banner, covered every single major servant that's going to be coming out on each of these GSSRs. You know what the high priority banners are to be looking out on. And even if you're going to summon on one of the other ones, you now know what are the good servants to look out for. You know the percentages of getting the servants that you want. You know who the duds are, who to look out for. You know everything. So if you found this video helpful, please slap a like on it, subscribe to the channel, and I am gonna catch you guys in the next one. All my socials are down in the description down below if you want to watch me play FGO on Twitch, if you want to just get bonus content on Patreon, you want to go to the Discord, all that is just in the description. But with that being said, I am gonna go ahead and get out of here, drink myself a tall glass of water because my throat is absolutely killing me. But with that being said, peace late, guys.